In this video, we'll learn about mesh light. Using mesh light, you can turn any object to a light source. Even though you have different light shapes like disc, sphere, and cylinder, sometimes you might need something more complicated. For example, in this scene, I want to turn on the neon sign and make these letters emit light. We do have a dome light that provides a basic environment lighting with an HDRI. We have this geometry called neon and we want to turn it into a light source. Let's start the IPR, add an area light, change its shape type to mesh. Let's also rename the light to RS mesh light so we know what we have. The first thing we need to do is to define the object that we want it to be the light source. You can define a geometry in this mesh field, drag and drop this neon geometry, and the next step would be to make sure the light is actually visible, and to do that, turn this visible option on. And here is our neon sign. Using intensity and exposure values, you can control the amount of emitted light. In this case, let's set the intensity to around 5. And that's all there is to it really. You can define any color for the mesh light using the color picker here as we learned in the previous lesson. So let's try a few colors here. Let's go for this vibrant pink and increase the intensity to around 7. And maybe something like this blue. And intensity can be 3 for this one. Obviously, the color and the intensity values will multiply each other, so you need to take that into consideration. And finally, let's try this orange color with intensity set to around 4. The rest of the options are the same as any other light, but there is something I want to talk about here, and that is how to texture a mesh light. Like any other light, you can define a texture using the texture input, but that can be a bit limited, especially if you want to work with procedural shaders and build customizable shader networks. To do that, we can add a shader graph to the light, and you can do that for every light, which let us have more control over different light attributes like color or intensity. So let's click on this Add Shader Graph button under the General tab of the light, which creates this shader graph in the Material Manager for our mesh light. You can double click on the material to open it up, or right from the mesh light, click on this Edit Shader Graph button, and here is our mesh light shader graph. We want to keep it simple as we haven't talked about materials and shader graphs yet. So let's add a simple Cinema 4D noise. Just press Shift and C, search for noise and add a max on noise, and connect its output to the color input of the mesh light. Now the defined noise will control the color of the light. Let's try different types of noises here. And maybe change the white color to the orange or pink to get a bit more interesting results. You can adjust the noise as you wish and get different looks. And obviously this can get way more complex, but we're just trying to keep it as simple as possible for now. So let's close the shader graph and just use this remove shader graph button to get back to where we were. Instead of using mesh light, you can take another approach, and that is to assign a redshift light material or incandescent material to the geometry that you want them to be light sources. For now, let's disable the mesh light, and in the Material Manager, add a new redshift incandescent material and assign it to the neon sign. And now if I open up the material, I can control the color and the intensity of the light source. We'll talk about incandescent material in the material section of the course, but generally speaking, if you want to turn an object to a light source, mesh light would be a better choice as it is less noisy and faster. Mesh light does contribute to direct lighting as well, while incandescent material solely relies on indirect lighting. That's why it can be noisy. especially on surfaces that are further away from the light source. So when turning an object to a light source, mesh light should be your first choice. And for the mesh light to do its job, global illumination needs to be enabled. If not, you might get some artifacts in areas near the light source. So for now, let's delete the material tag and turn on the mesh light again. When you have a light source directly visible in your camera view, it would be nice to be able to add some bloom effect for a more realistic look and to fight off some of the inevitable anti-aliasing issues that rise from the contrast between the light source pixels and the regular pixels. To do that, click on this cog icon at the top right corner of the render view, and under the display tab, enable bloom and open up its settings. You can obviously just play around with the values until you get what you like. Bloom softness, let's set it to around 0.2, intensity 2.5, and threshold of about 10. It's flexible. You can obviously adjust these values depending on your scene, and these would result in a nice bloomy hazy look. Okay, that's a very cool render. The wall geometry down here has a concrete shader assigned to it as well. Let's make that visible over our wood shader. And this could be a nice look too. You can have fun with colors and bloom amounts to get some nice images. I'll work on a few looks when the lesson is done and save it with the finished version of this scene, which you can find it in your project files, and the final renders will be available in the renders folder of your project files as well. So that's about Redshift Mesh Light. See you in the next one.